Hey everybody, it's JWittz here with your Pokemon trading card game, Card of the Day. At least it would be, but I got a couple of requests from some people that they would like to have 2 Fact of the Days this week. And while I probably can't carry this on week after week, I decided I'm having so much fun doing the Fact of the Days that I'd honored the request. So we've got 2 back-to-back, one today and one tomorrow. So for today's early Fact of the Day, our first fact is going to be talking about error cards. Now, if I talked about all the error cards that were out there, I could take up a full hour video and it would probably be really boring, really systematic, and it really is hard for me to pick out just a choice few to show you guys. First, I thought about some interesting ones, but I decided ultimately to go with the ones that I know the most about. So I'm going to talk about the 10 error cards that I remember the most, and these aren't really in order of impact, but rather just order of the time that I got them, and I guess how I discovered them. And at the end, since some of you guys I'm sure want to know about some super rare error cards and stuff like that, at the very end I'll talk about the rarest error card and a little bit of backstory behind that. So let's get started. Coming in at the very beginning comes in our very first set. Now, base set actually did have a lot of different kinds of error cards, but the one that I remember the most was the error base set Vulpixe. Now, almost all the Vulpixe printed, instead of saying 50 HP, say HP 50. Now, this is just pretty interesting to me because there weren't really many cards that had this error at the time, and as a kid, everybody who had a Vulpix thought they had something special. Now, as soon as you found out that Vulpix had that swapped HP and number, it was just pretty interesting. Everybody was, trying to trade them for a lot of stuff, but eventually everyone at the playground found out that all Vulpixes were like that, so they weren't really special. However, it was interesting. As a kid, I guess you're kind of set up to believe that everything is systematic and regular, so as soon as you find one card that kind of defines the rest of those characteristics, it becomes really interesting. And I think this concept kind of applies beyond just being children. As far as collectors go, when there's a card that breaks the norm in some way, whether through a printing error or just through something small, it becomes a big deal. Cards become a little more valuable and a little bit more interesting, and that's why they're today's Fact of the Day. Now, the next card came in a jungle, and this one, in my opinion, was a pretty big error. Now, I had this card for a while, and unfortunately, most of my original collection was destroyed in a hailstorm, but I was pretty proud of this one. And this card is Jungle Electrode. Now, see this image here? Now, if you're familiar with base set, you'd know that the image for this card is the one for base set Electrode, but the text is for Fossil Electrode. It's a pretty big mix-up. Now, this one's obviously interesting because they got the picture wrong entirely, but I guess you can't blame them too much. It's one of the very few cards, aside from Pikachu and maybe a few others, that had actually 2 Pokemon represented from the first and second sets of Pokemon's release. Now, this was just strange to me because I didn't think twice about it when I first pulled it. I didn't own the base set Electrode at the time, so I just kind of had it in my binder. Then later when I found out that some of my friends had Jungle Electrodes that looked regular, I found out that mine really was a big mistake. Now, in general, neither of these cards were that great, so I never really ended up using them in decks or anything, but it was something I was pretty proud of showing to other people. It really is an interesting error, and I don't think there's been many cards that they've misplaced the entire picture before. I guess as far as mistakes go, it could be one of the biggest that there is as far as errors that have been passed from any set. Coming up next is Dark Vileplume from Rocket. Now, the non-holo version of Dark Vileplume had an error where it was weak to fighting. Most people didn't really catch this, but I remember always owning the card and thinking that it was really weird. Most grass Pokemon at the time were either weak to fire or psychic, so to be weak to fighting was just strange to me, to say the least. Later I found out it wasn't supposed to be that way when I saw some friends with the holo version of the card, and I noticed I had a misprint on my hands. However, this isn't the first time that Pokemon's had an error between the fighting and fire energies, and one of the biggest and most confusing text errors that there are comes with Blaine's Charizard. Just read this. Discard all fighting energy cards attached to Blaine's Charizard. If all energy attached to Blaine's Charizard provide 2 fire energy, discard all of them? What? As a kid, trying to read this was just insane. I had no idea how to play the card, and because I thought Charizard was a good card when I was first getting into the game. I wanted to play it, but I had no idea what to do. Did it mean that you had to have fighting energy on your Charizard? I still didn't really understand what it meant to have a fire energy that counted as 2 fire energy. All those things were just so confusing to me, and I was never able to play the card correctly because they just messed it up. That first energy is supposed to be a fire energy, so including fighting just makes the whole thing a mess. Another card that was interesting from that exact same set, Gym Challenge, is Rocket's Minefield Gym. Now, my cousins own this card, and when I was looking through for things to trade, I was reading it, and I just didn't understand it. I later found out that it wasn't supposed to be that way, but at the time, I just thought they made a really dumb card. So, flip a coin of tails, put damage counters on that Pokemon. So, do you just get to choose how many damage counters you want? What does it mean to just put damage counters on them? Later, I found out it's supposed to be put 2 damage counters, but otherwise, it was just so non-specific that as a kid, I had no idea how to play the card. I think we made up our own rule. I think we made it, 2 or 3 damage counters. We were pretty close to the original ruling, but some cards like that just cannot be played when you read them by text, and it's really interesting. Next up is from the Neo cards, and this was coming toward the end of my original journey with Pokemon cards before I ended up switching over to some other games and I stopped collecting. But this one I remember pretty well, and it's one of the Holo Meganiums from Neo Genesis. This one's pretty interesting if you look at it right off the bat. It's got a black text for its Pokepower instead of a red text. Now, it doesn't change the card, doesn't make it unplayable, doesn't make it, hard to understand like some of these other ones, but I just remember it specifically because, I don't know, it just looks ugly. You've got the black text instead of the classic red, and it just looks weird to have that bold black text at the top of the Pokemon Power, but another card that confused me when I was a kid playing through the game. Next up, now this is a huge jump because, as I said, I stopped playing, then later got back into the game around Great Encounters in the Diamond and Pearl sets, is from the first Diamond and Pearl set and Polion Level X. A few copies of this card have a Pokebody instead of a Pokemon Power, which kind of goes in that same theme with Meganium. Now, this isn't really confusing. If you just read the text, you figure out what to do, but at this point, when I was starting to learn all the new mechanics, I found that Pokebody is something that's passive. It's always happening. A Pokepower is something that you have to announce at a specific time. So reading the card and finding out that it was a Pokebody really did confuse me. I was just trying to get back into the game, trying to learn what to do, and I have an active ability that is supposed to be passive. I found out shortly afterwards when I saw some tin promos that it's supposed to be a Pokemon Power, but the very first copy of this card I saw had a body. It confused me, and it's an interesting error. Now, next up is Breloom from Secret Wonders, and this card has a double error in the text, and it's pretty funny. Remove from Breloom a number of damage counters. So not only did they make it an N instead of M for Breloom, but they forgot the R at the end of the word number. I don't know if the person that was putting the text in just fell asleep at that moment, but a double error back-to-back is pretty funny in my opinion. Now, number 9 is the classic Psyduck from Triumphant. Flip a coin. Most people just think it's funny. I think it just goes well with Psyduck. He's usually seen as a dumb Pokemon, so of course having him flip a coin instead of flipping a coin is just amusing. However, one interesting tidbit for those of you guys who didn't know is that Weepinbell from this set also has flip a coin in his attack. Now, I didn't even know this until recently, and I guess it's just because Psyduck gets so much of the hype for flipping instead of flipping. However, Weepinbell does it too. And last but not least is one that everybody's been talking about recently with the release of Call of Legends, and that's Phanpy from Call of Legends. Now, inside of his Pokepower, they say Phanpy multiple times. Now, this is an error that a lot of people have made just with the card in general, or the Pokemon in general. People call him Phanpy because there's that soft PH sound in the word elephant. However, the card is pronounced Phanpy. They made the mistake twice in that body, and it was a pretty big deal for those hardcore fans who know how to pronounce their Pokemon correctly. So that kind of outlines my experience with error cards. I know it's not too exciting. I know that there are a lot more, but I'm not trying to cover them all. I know that there are so many to talk about, and I just thought I'd take you guys through a list of the ones that I actually personally owned over my course playing the Pokemon trading card game. But as I promised, last but not least, let's talk about the most valuable error card of all time, pre-release Raichu. Now, I'd been hearing about this card as early as 2000 as some really low-key rumors, and when I was first hearing about it, the value of the card was priced around $150 to $200. Now, when we first played the game, and I was reading through all these internet websites and magazines trying to figure out what cards were so valuable, this was a big deal to me. Usually you heard about like a first edition base set Charizard being the most valuable card at around $100 to $150. So hearing the few cards that could trump that really brought an air of importance. Now, the way that pre-release Raichu works is basically Clefable from Jungle was the original pre-release card when Jungle was about to be released, and Clefable happens to be next to Raichu in a few printing sheets, such as this one seen here. They print through the cards, they stamp the Clefable, and then they cut them apart. Now, I don't know if this sheet is particularly the one that they used for pre-release cards, but what ended up happening is a small handful of Raichu cards ended up receiving the stamp instead. Now, immediately Wizards of the Coast pulled a lot of these cards off, and either kept them for themselves or destroyed them, but just a few copies of them were able to escape destruction or hoarding and have found their way into a few choice collections as one of the rarest cards out there. Now, you know I said it was around $150 to $200 when I was first hearing about it. Well, about 10 to a dozen years later, the card is a relic, basically, of the Pokemon trading card game, and I think recently it was sold for around $10,000. Obviously, that value keeps going up as only a few copies are known to have existed, and as far as I'm concerned, I've only heard about between 5 and 10 copies, and that number is probably closer to 5. Now, normally most printing errors are just swept under the rug with a new print, and they just kind of forget about the ones that have errors for them, but this is a pretty big error, and they tried to fix it as soon as possible. You don't want a card with a pre-release stamp on it before it's shipped out into regular packs after the set's already been released, so they tried to hoard the cards and get rid of them as quickly as they could. A few exist, and there are only a few photos that prove that they do, but the card's been a rare sought-after card for a long time, and that value will continually escalate forever, considering that there's only a few left, and that number will just keep going down as collections are forgotten or destroyed. So anyways, thanks for watching today's Pokemon Trading Card Game Fact of the Day, and feel free to comment below on your favorite error card over the history of the Pokemon Trading Card Game. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about something along a similar vein as my past few Fact of the Days, and this one is just going to be about interesting cards. Cards that, weren't banned, weren't censored, weren't errors, but the artwork just baffles me. There's a few really funny ones that I'd like to discuss down the line, so let's look at that tomorrow. Peace.